All right, true believers. Today we're going to learn how to graph using Google Sheets. If you've done any graphing, say with Microsoft Excel or another spreadsheet program, it's very similar, although I've got to be honest, Google Sheets still not as robust as Excel. But the ease of cutting and pasting things and dropping them into docs is really, really high there. So it makes it worth it. And for what we're going to be using it for, perfectly good enough. So you're going to need your data. You're going to need the class data spreadsheet. Now you're going to need a copy of it because you no longer, when it comes time to do this graph, you will no longer have sharing rights to that. I will have removed sharing rights in it and made it view only, but that's okay. You need a copy of the data. So you will go to File and make a copy of this data for yourself. You're going to be using the data and the graphing that we do to put into your lab report. So get a copy of the data file. You can rename it if you want just by clicking on the title and changing the name of it. It's up to you. But you will be using this information. So we're going to graph, just make a basic graph with the numbers in this data sheet. And you'll notice that I have to have one set that is 0, 0. And there's a reason for that. We're going to be figuring out the slope, and we need to make sure that the regression, the linear regression for this data set goes through the origin. What that means, that's just really fancy for saying we're going to calculate an equation that all of these data points come very close to for a straight line that would go through all of them. And one of the points on that line has to be the origin. And that'll become clear as you sort of get into the data and understand what it's all about. So to make an XY scatter, we need to make sure that the volume is listed before the mass. And the reason is that these spreadsheet programs automatically choose the first column to be on the x-axis and the second column to be on the y-axis, and that we want volume plotted on the x-axis. That's what it tells me to do in the instructions. So I've already set it up, and the data set that you have should already have it set up as volume first and then mass. You're just going to select the numbers. Okay, don't select any words, just the numbers. And then you're going to come up here and you're going to hit the Insert Chart button, just like that. Now it defaults to a bar graph, which is useless for what we want. And there's really nothing in this Start tab that you're going to need to do. So just click on the Charts tab and choose XY Scatter, and then the one with the little dots, not the bubbles. Okay, the dots. And what you'll see then right away is a preview of what your data looks like when it's plotted on an XY scatter plot. Now you'll notice that a lot of these points are kind of in a straight line right here. Yeah, there's my 0 point. There are a few that don't fit on the line, and those are probably our outliers. But we've got to pretty this chart up a little bit. First of all, chart title. That's not the title of this chart. That's just sort of a placeholder. And horizontal x-axis title, that's not what we call what's going on down here. So we're going to customize this. We're going to go to Customize, and we're going to start working our way down this list of options of things to do. And I'll tell you the ones that you need to change, and then there's some that you could change if you want. And then there's some you probably shouldn't change. The first thing is the title of the chart. So right in here, I'm going to change this title. I'm going to call this Mass versus Volume Data for Unknown Metal. English teachers used to hate me because my titles never got to the point. If I hit enter there, it'll change it over here in the preview. So it's a fairly long title, but you know what? Anybody who reads that title is going to know exactly what my graph is showing them. If you want, you can change where the legend, this is the only thing we have in the legend right now, and we don't really need a legend, so you can keep it there if you want, but I'm going to shut it off. I'm going to select none for a legend because I don't need it in there. All right, you can change the background of the graph if you'd like, if you want something, well, that's really disturbing. I like white because I'm kind of boring. You can choose any of these colors, but please make sure that the graph is readable. You start messing with the colors too much and it gets really hard on the eyes, and I'd rather not have eye strain from reading your graph. Okay, so keep it reasonable. If you want to pretty it up a little bit, you can. Okay, you can choose maximize. What that does is it puts the title and the axes inside the axes here, the axis labels. I don't really like that, but you can choose that if you want. You have some freedom here. It's really all about the data anyway. Okay, so now we have to fix these titles here. Horizontal axis title. That is not what that is measuring. along the horizontal axis is the volume of this piece of metal. So I'm going to put volume, and then in parentheses I am going to put the unit that measures, because you'll notice there's no units there. You need to know that sort of thing. Hit return and it changes. Now I also need one for here, so I'm going to go to where it says axis. I'm going to pull down this list and choose left vertical. And there's nothing in this box because there is no left vertical axis title, but I'm going to call that what it is. That is my mass, and that mass is in grams. So now I have properly labeled axes, proper title. My points are all plotted on there rather nicely. I don't need axis labels or any of that business. I don't have to change any of this. These numbers are fine. The number format is from the data. That's fine. You can put in grid lines if you want. It starts to muddy the graph up a little bit, but try it out if you want to see how it looks. Take a look at it. Scroll down some more. The scale is default. You don't need to mess with that. It automatically sets it up into a nice big scale so that it takes up, your points take up the most space as possible. Series 1, you can change the color of the little lines. I think I'm going to make mine a nice Edgewood maroon. So there's the color of our points there. You can change the size. You can make them really, really small. You can make them very, very large, although that starts to get a little unwieldy. So I think 7 pixels is a decent size for those, but that's up to you. Now we get to trend line. Trend line is a really simplified word for something called linear regression series. And what a linear regression is simply just finding a straight line that most of these points will be either very close to or on. Now we're going to put a trend line in, but it's not going to be a good trend line, and I'll tell you why in just a second. You're going to choose a linear trend line, and it's going to put a line in there. And see, that's pretty neat. It kind of goes through as many of these points as possible. And if you touch the trend line, you can see all of the different points that it goes to. But I don't like this because the trend line does not go through the origin down here, and it really should. However, just to get a sense as to how your points line up, it's good to put a little line in there. Okay, and that's essentially it. You can change the title of the trend line, but if you've removed the legend like I did, it doesn't really matter what you put in there. Okay, and then you can change the color and the opacity and all of that. So this is your graph. Now when you're done, you hit insert, and it's going to put it sort of here. And you can move that around, and I would recommend that you move it kind of out of the way, because what you're going to do with it is you're going to insert it into your lab report. Now that you have this thing sitting here, okay, you can choose this little pull-down list, and you can say copy chart. Now it puts it on the clipboard for you. Now you go to your lab report, and you go to the place where you want the graph to be, and you paste it in there, and it will put the chart in. And it'll look just the way you did it. You can change the size a little bit if you want. You want to make it a little bigger. You want to center it. You can do all of that stuff. Okay? Now, the other thing we want to put in here is the class data. So before we put the class data in there, I want to talk about getting this trend line, or figuring out a better example of this, a better trend line, a better linear regression that does go through the origin. Since this doesn't do it, since this particular graph doesn't allow us to do that, and it's just not a function in Sheets, we can kind of cheat and do it by using the slope function. So I'm going to type the word slope because that's what I'm going to calculate in a second. And then in the next cell over here, I'm going to type equals, and then in capitals, slope. And when I type that, you'll see Sheet says, oh, you're doing a formula here. Okay. So I type equals, slope in capital letters, then I open parentheses, and it tells me what kind of data I need. Y, comma, X, and it gives me all of this stuff, okay? Because slope is change in Y over change in X, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the data that I want here. So slope of, well, change in Y. Y was our mass value. So I'm going to select all of those numbers, and then I'm going to hit a comma. And then I'm going to select all of the X values, and then I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter. And when I do that, I get the slope of the line that would have gone through the origin and passed through as many of these points as possible. That is my slope. And slope is kind of important here. it's very important that you know what the slope is, because there's a question later on, what does the slope represent? And you're going to need to think about that a little bit. Okay, so this is the slope of my line, and I want that in with my data. Okay, so now all I have to do is click and drag and select all of the cells that I want to show up in my lab report. I've just selected them all, and you can either hit Control and C together, or right click and choose copy, or go up to edit and choose copy, and however you want to copy it. Go to your lab report, go to where you want to put your class data, and paste it in. Okay, it takes a second, and it'll paste that entire section. See, there's our slope. It'll paste that entire section in there, and then you can manipulate the rows and do whatever you want to do with it. Okay, so that's how you get your values into your lab report. You get your class data in there really nice. You've got your graph in there looking really nice. I like a big graph, so I'm going to make it bigger again. And I'm just going to move this down to that other page when the time is right. And that's all there is to it. So graphing using sheets. Save this file. It'll get saved to Drive, but you can save it so that you can use it for other things if you need to go back and redo it. And that's really all there is to it. So get the data and build your graph.